next panel is one that I think everybody here will find incredibly interesting. What infrastructure projects are needed to lay the foundations for the new industry in a hyper-connected world? And moderating that panel will be Dr. Roberto Alvarez, the Executive Director of the GFCC, and our panelists will be Dr. Fahad Mashaid, Vice President of Business Development and Enterprise BU at Saudi Telecom, Dr. Kande Yumkela, Distinguished Fellow at the GFCC and the former Director General of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, Dr. Kyoki Jackson, Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Lockheed Martin, and His Excellency Zakri Abdul Hamid, Science Advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that you have a great chance to hear and to interact in relation to some of the really challenging things that we have today in the world in terms of creating the infrastructures for new industries to emerge and for citizens as a whole to connect with this new age. It is 11:30 now. When we finish this panel at 12:30, 80.6 billion emails will be sent around the globe since now to then. 10,500 tweets are sent every second in the world. There's a huge transformation, but beyond that, and beyond that transformation in life, a transformation in business, and a transformation on infrastructures in the world we live is taking place. We are 7 billion inhabitants in the world today, but in a few years from now, in 2020, we are expected to have 50 billion devices connected to the internet. So beyond the transformation in life, the digital age is really transforming the world around us. And we are here to explore some of those things and how those trends and transitions that are happening will really reshape society, business, and what we need to do as society to lay the foundations that will really enable us to take advantage of those things. And I just want to, before having our speakers, to say two things. First is that part of the efforts of the GFCC are related to benchmarking and to really helping countries to better understand where they position themselves. As part of the initiative, we have created something that is the GFCC Competitiveness Decoder. It's a database on top of what we have implemented, visualization and statistical tools. And taking advantage of technology, we are really trying to understand what's driving competitiveness. And if we have a look at infrastructure, more and more digital infrastructures are making a difference in terms of setting countries apart. And it's not just talking, it's by analyzing data. So this is a key issue for the economy, and there are lots of opportunities to be created, opportunities related to people, to business, and to the soft infrastructures that we all need to deploy. And so we talked a bit about transformations in society. We talked a lot about youth in this forum, or how to engage youth, and Prince Saud has raised that in one of the questions and one of the conversations that we had. If we have a look today, a teenager in the United States, a 16-year-old girl, will send 400 messages a day, and that's going up. And more we'll have things not just transforming society, but also transforming business. I'm really pleased to have this distinguished set of panelists today. We will explore things related to how to really deploy infrastructures, to the impacts in society, how to build the soft infrastructures in science and technology, and the transformations in business that are coming. And in order to really to be started with this conversation, I would like first to go to Dr. Mushayyed. You have a leading role in a telecommunications company working here in the kingdom and facing this challenge in three ways: deploying the infrastructures and creating opportunities for people and business. Yeah. So what are the developments and the challenges and the opportunities that you see going forward for the creation and deployment of digital infrastructures?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the question. A pleasure to be here. Thank you for the organizers. I think we've heard yesterday some of our colleagues and this morning also talking about digital economy, knowledge-based economy, digital world, digitization efforts throughout different verticals in the economy, education, health, transportation. All these efforts require massive infrastructure. Now, infrastructure companies like our company is really building the right infrastructure at the right place with the right economics behind the business case to build the required infrastructure to co-op with the demand. You mentioned in terms of huge requirement, and Saudi Arabia is considered to be a leader in terms of usage of social media. Number of tweets, I think Saudi Arabia is one of the top two or three, if not the number one in number of tweets globally. So that would require so much infrastructure to be built, and we're doing so by building the right, connectivity infrastructure, be it the wireless 3G, 4G, and we're going today onto 5G, and building the right broadband infrastructure, the fiber to the home, fiber to the businesses. However, the efforts of building the right infrastructure by the private sector is not enough. Today, we've seen in the recent past, we've seen so much policy, national broadband agency policy that is adopted by the policymakers globally, where the government is really supporting the private sector through, of course, innovative model, private-public partnership type, JV type, where they really intervene in order to build the right infrastructure in especially remote areas. Private sector will not really go and build in unfeasible areas the right infrastructure that is required to co-op with the demand of the citizen, of course, happy citizen, unless it's really feasible. So we've seen recently, and we are talking to the policymaker here in order to build the required broadband, especially in rural areas. And of course, there are also efforts by the wireless, efforts by the regulator here to build, which is the Universal Service Fund that is really serving the rural with at least certain speed to bridge the gap on the digital gap. Now, this is on the connectivity aspect of it. But however, today, I think globally we are beyond connectivity. I mean, connectivity is becoming really a utility. It's a need, it's a necessity, and it's already there. It has to be there. We're talking today about, we heard about our colleagues from Lockheed Martin, from Siemens. We're talking about cybersecurity, we're talking about cloud services, we're talking about data center, massive data center application services. Those are really advanced solutions that are required by either government agencies or the private sector in order to be in the path or the right path to the digital economy or the knowledge-based economy. And therefore, collectively, we have to work together in order to provide the right infrastructure, which include massive investment in data centers and cloud services. Of course, on top of cloud services, we have to have the right cybersecurity services and the right environment that help to flourish all these things. And of course, the right policies that really protect and support, either support the private sector investment or protect the data and the data privacy of the individuals.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much. I think that you raised two questions or 2 points that I will be back to then when we have a new round of conversation. this idea of connectivity that's more than a need, and that there's a growing conversation around the globe as connectivity as a right and as an imperative, a competitive imperative. And the other point is this, how to make infrastructures available in remote areas. And both in terms of technology, but in terms of the business models that will make those things possible. And I think those are two points that in some way will be explored over the panel. And moving forward in the conversation, I would like to invite Dr. Ian Keller to provide his comments, and maybe considering two different perspectives. You, as a global leader, you have had this incredible experience at the United Nations Development Organization, having a look to the world in general, and seeing those transformations happens and having impact and have something to say to industrial development, growth, economic development. But also, as you have commented here, with your role in Africa and going back to Africa, what are the opportunities? What are the challenges that are being created by the digital age?
Well, I give 3 points. First of all, we know globally that about 2.5 to 3 billion more people will move into the middle class. About 2.5 billion of those in Asia. These people want more televisions, more cars, more of everything, because they're moving into the middle class. How do we meet that demand? In addition, we also know, based on the World Energy Outlook by the International Energy Agency, McKinsey and others, that energy demand is going to grow by 30 to 40% by 2030 to power all this, power your telecoms and your cars and everything. So the world faces this challenge that more people moving into the middle class, economy is growing, we need more energy. That's one trend. It creates an investment opportunity. We estimate roughly $3 trillion investment every year over the next 15 years to meet that demand for energy. And that is probably about 50% of all infrastructure investment. We either innovate and invest in a transition into a new energy mix, or we lock in old energy systems. So that's one opportunity. Could be a challenge, but I see it as a market opportunity, a $3 trillion per year investment opportunity to innovate. The second aspect is the convergence of energy systems and ICT. We see digitization of energy supply systems. On the one hand, in the rich countries, more move into smart grids, greater move into smart metering within households. But also we see, even in rich countries, whether in Germany or in California for that matter, consumers being more interested in how much they can also control services on their applications. So you see their consumers wanting to have their own solar panels and storage systems. We also see even bigger energy demand centers, like for retailers like Walmart, IKEA. They want more control over their energy services, so they're putting solar panels on their warehouses. Recently, we were surprised when Walmart said they're probably one of the largest, if not largest, distributor of solar panels. And they started from just their own rooftops on their warehouses. But now they're going into distributing it, installing it for consumers. Again, giving consumers some of that independence to choose their source of energy using their applications. Finally, developing countries. Whether it's India with 300 to 350 million people without electricity, to Bangladesh, or to my neighborhood in Africa. In Africa, we have 620 million people without electricity out of 1 billion. That population is going to 1.4 billion by 2030, 2.5 billion by 2050. And you look at the projections from the International Energy Agency, still about 1 billion people in Africa will be without electricity. But yet we see the opportunity with the convergence of digital mobile in East Africa already, in Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, where people are able to pay for simple solar household systems with their mobile phones because of mobile payment systems. So again, convergence of mobile technology and renewable energy is creating an opportunity for distributive, decentralized energy systems. And the last point is, from what I hear from the energy experts, as Tesla and others begin to push the boundaries and frontiers on energy storage systems, battery systems. We believe that the battery and storage technology will be the biggest disruptive technology in energy systems globally. It will enhance how much you can integrate renewables into the grid and creating grid stability. It will give freedom to consumers to choose their energy source. And people believe they see a future where the guy drives his vehicle based on using his electric vehicle, comes back home and reconnects to supply energy to the grid. This is not fiction. It's beginning to happen in China already. So that's the future. We see this convergence. And it's a bigger challenge or an opportunity for you, the planners of infrastructure investments, to say, well, maybe we can leapfrog into that digital future where there is more consumer freedom and choice of energy systems, where in fact, like Saudi Arabia is trying to do, you integrate renewable energy into your energy systems for energy security, but also just diversification of supplies. Big issue for Europe in particular, where I have lived now for almost 20 years.
That's great. And so this nexus, this energy telecommunications or energy digitalization, is something that you really bring to the discussion. And I understand that not just in terms of efficiency, but in terms of access, as the example that you gave related to Africa. But we will need to build the solutions, the businesses, and the technologies to that. And we will also need to build, let's say, the soft infrastructures to all those things happen. Yesterday in one of the panels, we heard from John Larson from KAUST talking about the importance of telecommunications for KAUST. As a leading research university on the globe, you cannot be disconnected. And you depend more and more, not just on high performance computing, but the capacity to do transactions. Yeah. That is part of building those infrastructures and connecting, let's say, the data, digital telecommunications infrastructures with research infrastructures. Is part of the whole development, and in some way, societies are trying to do. Yeah. And having said that, I would like to invite Professor Zachary to talk a bit about what are you doing or at this moment in Malaysia to address not just the digital divide in general, but also to create the research and the capabilities that are needed for your country to succeed in the global age, in this digital age.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very delighted and honored to be here. And I'm also amazed at your opening remark showing how rapid and influential is the ICT worldwide. Let me just express some views from my vantage point. I'm the science advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Right off the bat, what we are trying to do is to position science, technology, and innovation as an engine for economic development. Malaysia is a middle-income developing country, and we have a vision of being a developed country by 2020. It's called Vision 2020, whereby the median income would be around 15,000 US. When this vision was first launched in 1990, our income was maybe around 8,000. But as of this year, it's around 10,000, and we hope in a few years' time it will be at least 15,000. So we see science, technology, and innovation as the vehicle to move forward our economic agenda. There's a lot of positioning being done here, but let me just address the issue of this digital divide. Let me give you some figures in terms of numbers. At the present moment, the ICT contribution to GDP in Malaysia is around 9.8%. We are trying to target by 2020 to a level of 17%. At the current moment in the World Competitiveness Scoreboard, Malaysia by the IMD standards number 16. We tend to be in the top 10 by 2020. In the digital economy rankings at this moment, we are number 36. By 2020, we hope to be in the top 20. Why do I spend a bit of time on this? Because I think for any country, it's very constructive to have some targets. And that targets should be championed by a strong political leadership. So all these targets are really endorsed and led by the head of government itself, and that is the Prime Minister. So in terms of the political will or the political commitment, it starts from the top. In terms of this digital issue, we have launched in 1996 what is called the Multimedia Super Corridor, launched by the then Prime Minister Mahathir, and is being pursued eventually today. But one of the vehicles is what is called the Digital Malaysia Initiative. So under this initiative, there are 4 thrust areas. One is what we call the digital entrepreneurship, and that is to develop some pilot projects whereby we could one day produce products for the global market. The issue here is for developing countries not just to be consumers of this digital product, but to a certain extent to also be producers. And this is in the sense that I welcome the interest of this Global Competitiveness Council, where it can be a vehicle of trying to promote this collaboration among countries. In fact, at one time, the USB thumb drive was inspired and mooted by a Malaysian, but the condition in the country was not conducive then. He went to Taiwan, and got it done over there, and the rest is history. The second one, Chair, is how do you engage the bottom 40% of the population? We need to be inclusive if the digital situation needs to be improved. So engaging the B40 is very important. I heard just now one of the speakers mentioning about making ICT available in remote areas. We are doing that also, notwithstanding that 70% of Malaysia is now very urbanized. The second aspect is to raise the micro-sourcing, sort of financing for innovation. The third point is engaging the youth. This is very challenging, in fact, for a developing country. And one of the knowledge gaps there, the knowledge deficit, the lack of mastery of the STEM subject, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But we are taking steps to address that deficiency. And finally, I think how do we engage the small and medium enterprise in the country, which made up about more than 95% of the industries. And here there are several projects which are being taken up. So, Chair, those are some of my initial remarks on how we are addressing this very exciting and challenging digital issue in our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. You framed that in those 4 points, and you finished talking about businesses. How to create the connections and how to create the conditions for SMEs to take advantage and to use digital technologies. And this is all about a reality and that we heard yesterday from you, Dr. Jackson, about transformations that are taking place in technology and business. So how do you see, and what are the impacts for industry and manufacturing in general of this industry, of this digital age and this transformation?
Thank you for the question there, Dr. Alvarez, and it's an honor to be here as part of this distinguished panel today. I guess I'd start by just saying that ultimately when we think about infrastructure and industry, in general, it's about increasing productivity. And of course, you can take that analogy, whether it's in industry or citizen services, or even, to paraphrase Kwanzaa Hall earlier, that the happiness of cities and the joy of living. But in any sense, increasing that productivity through infrastructure. And maybe to illustrate some of the challenges for the 21st century, I'm going to reach back over a century to the Panama Canal. And the point I want to make is that a lot of times you have to look at what is the infrastructure behind the infrastructure in terms of what's going to make that greatest difference in productivity. And so, of course, to build the Panama Canal, there were many, many infrastructures needed, whether it was railroads or harbors, digging machines. But ultimately, and interestingly, the single biggest difference was made actually through the innovations of a gentleman named Dr. William Gorgas. And his innovation was all around health, and in fact, how to eliminate the malaria and the yellow fever that were plaguing the construction at that time. And so that was the key infrastructure that enabled everything else. Now, look at today in our world, and some of the key infrastructures are actually almost invisible, but something that I have a great deal of experience with is the global positioning system. And Lockheed Martin, of course, has been a major provider of that for the U.S. government. And, but ultimately, this is a global and worldwide utility, and it enables everything from banking and financial payment systems to timing that goes behind cell phone systems and telecommunications to innovations in agriculture, transportation, and the list goes on and on. And so again, you have to think about what are the infrastructures behind the infrastructure. Now, at Lockheed Martin, we prioritize our investments in infrastructure, again, with that mantra of, where are we going to make the biggest increases in productivity? And I'm going to talk a little bit later in some of my comments in this panel about what we call our digital tapestry or our digital environment that's fundamentally reshaping the way we do business and the way we produce products within Lockheed Martin. But what I'd like to maybe mention up front is just some of and maybe 3 key lessons that we've learned during that transformation. And the first is that you have to embrace complexity. So today's modern infrastructures, they're interconnected, they're layered, they're complex. And they don't only require sophisticated elements and interplay between the infrastructure, the tools, the processes. There's also this element that you have to have the talent infrastructure behind that to deal with that complexity and the interconnectedness. And because of the rapid change, it's caused us to fundamentally rethink how we deal with talent and with keeping a workforce that's adept and agile in those processes and those tool sets. And one thing I'll emphasize about this complexity, the good news is that now there are tools that are really enabling us to deal with that in a very transparent manner. And so I think that especially in developing economies, you can learn from what's gone before and maybe avoid some of the mistakes of the past. The second key lesson is that you get what you measure, and I guess it's almost a truism in business, but it's becoming increasingly important as you look at 21st century infrastructures. And so now we have ubiquitous and cheap sensors, but you have to be very thoughtful about how you use those. And I talked about the power of big data yesterday, but I think a caveat that I didn't mention is if you don't measure the right things, you're almost certain to get the wrong answers. And so being thoughtful in infrastructure about what you measure is critically important. And maybe the final point, you have to take the long view. And so, it's not just about infrastructure for today, but what is the maintenance that's required for tomorrow? And I'll particularly emphasize a couple of things, the themes of resilience and of security. And so these are absolutely fundamental aspects of any infrastructure that we develop today. And they have to be considered from the very beginning, the very outset of development. And systems that lack security and resilience, they are certain to disappoint. They're certain to fail in the face of an uncertain future. And they'll fall prey to disasters, whether they're natural or man-made. So those are my key three themes here. And maybe on that last point, I'll just a little bit of an emphasis for global leaders. We need to consider the importance of the infrastructure that's needed to understand the world around us and its environment. In particular, as you think about the potential for climate change and the discussions around mitigation or adaptation, ultimately, the global climate monitoring infrastructure, for example, is fragile and it's failing. And so we need to better enable global sensing, and so that's a global infrastructure, including things like space-based monitoring, to understand what's happening to our world, to help predict future outcomes, and to enable rigorous studies and rigorous experimentation and thought about possible outcomes. So thank you for that opportunity.
That's great. And I think in this initial round of comments here, there's something that really comes to my mind, having a look at the 4 different contributions. The need for new models. The need for new models to understand how infrastructures are designed and configured in terms of complex systems, as you have raised. The needs for new models for businesses. The new models to develop the talent pool. So, and this is something that we will explore again in the conversation. And then back to, let's say, the issue of access to infrastructures. You have mentioned this once again, and I said that I would be back to the point of accessibility, yeah? Not just as a need, but also as a right and an imperative for competitiveness. Maybe if you could share some of the developments or the things that you are doing in terms of experimenting to new models to increase access to digital infrastructures here in the kingdom and in the region.
Well, as a private sector, I mean, luckily, we have inherited a massive network that was built by the government prior to 1998, when the telecom business was owned by the Ministry of Telecom that time and Post. Since 1998, we went into a journey where we became very private sector, and then the market was liberalized, and it was really a success story here of the policymakers in terms of digitizing or privatizing a sector, which is the telecom sector. So luckily, the Saudi Arabia today is really sitting on a massive infrastructure kingdom-wide. So in terms of access or accessibility to telecom, we today reached almost to more than 90% of the kingdom covered by 2G and 3G services. In terms of 2G, we are almost 98% coverage kingdom-wide. So even if you go to the poorest areas, the middle of mountains, you will have no issue with coverage. So the access to basic service are there, 2G. Now 2G will give you limited experience in terms of, we're talking about, for example, remote medical services, virtual type education. With that limited technology in remote areas, you will not have that pleasant experience. That's with the 2G technology. The 3G technology, we're almost, Saudi Telecom today, they covered almost more than 70-80% of the kingdom with 3G services, and especially with the major cities. Fiber, however, which is the really ultimate technology that is required in order to deliver the right service at the right time, the right place, more within the efficiently required, the quality. The broadband coverage with fiber is still around 25%. And again, private sector, including our company, will not go and build a broadband infrastructure with fiber connectivity in non-feasible areas, remote areas. The basic services are there. But if it has to do with broadband and fiber, then we've seen globally governments are intervening with a creative business model to ensure the right speed. And we're talking about agendas, varies between national broadband policies between 100 meg and above. And it's happening here in Saudi Arabia. It's a matter of time. We've been in discussion with the government almost a year now. It is really at the top agenda of the government to ensure that even at the farthest areas, kingdom-wide, they will be connected by at least 100 meg of connectivity services. So, and that, of course, then will enable and stimulate all kinds of services that we're talking about, be it education services, health services, even to the further remote areas through the broadband connectivity that is going to be seamless in terms of quality and experience. So basic services are there, but high-speed type of services will require intervention and will require innovative business model with public-private partnership type relationship.
A common topic for, not just for this conversation, but for instance, that were released today, our principles, and this whole idea of public-private partnerships is for sure a central issue for infrastructure development and for competitiveness, But once again, let's say in the mood of new models, I want to go back to you, Kande, and what are some of the developments? You mentioned some of the things that have been seen in Africa in terms of connecting, let's say, energy and telecommunications. What else have you seen in terms of new models that are being created to address the issue of accessibility, but also to create opportunities and to create economic value through digital infrastructures?
Well, a lot of move in public-private partnership models. But what I see more and hear people talking about more is more innovation in financial models. Energy and long-term infrastructure investments are still risky in some neighborhoods. These are long-term investments for 20, 30 years. People worry about political risk. Now, of course, the big elephant in the room, climate risk and climate resilience. So there is a lot of call for new business models that will do, particularly if you listen to the bankers, they talk a lot about de-risking models. And in the United States, we see US OPIC and MEGA doing a lot of work. They've put over $1 billion now into just de-risking investments in developing countries to enhance access to various kinds of services. So new financial modeling. This afternoon I was going to talk about it, but I better raise it here. One of the big discussions that will take place in Paris in a few weeks will be how you climate-proof infrastructure. Given what happened in Sandy, with Sandy in New York, and in other places, if you take Philippines, we have estimates now by the World Bank and others that look, one very bad extreme weather event can wipe out 10 years of infrastructure investment. Boom, just like that. So the question now is, how do you do financial modeling if you're planning that infrastructure to pay for the incremental costs of climate proofing it or making it more resilient? It's the same in small island states in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. One event wipes out 10, 20 years of investment. So in the business modeling now, to attract private investment to come in, how do you provide new financial tools to help them mitigate all of that risk? Is an area where I know there's a lot of talk. And finally, if you take India, India is where we believe is a good microcosm to see where all of these things connect. An emerging economy that it still needs to use a lot of coal-fired plants, an economy that still has 700 million people without clean cooking solutions. We talk about access to electricity, but cooking is another one, and I'll end on that one. We estimate 4.3 million premature deaths every year because of use of firewood, charcoal, and cow dung for cooking. You know, that number 4.3 million is worse than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. It's killing more people. You combine that with outdoor air pollution, almost 7 million, and cities like Delhi and Beijing with pollution, you begin to see the totality of how lack of energy begins to touch everything. And in India, it's a beautiful microcosm to say, wow, huge market, over 1 billion people, but then you have to do everything. Digital connectivity, clean cooking, new cities. The estimate is that India needs to build the equivalent of 3 Chicagos in the next 30 years, new cities. So you can see why the Prime Minister of India is saying, for me, energy is the issue. How do I connect the remaining 300 million people without access to electricity? How do I build 100 more new energy efficient cities? So they have an opportunity there for investors to say, fine, we design new, we leapfrog into new technologies, learning from everybody as a business opportunity. So very complicated new set of new models. One other comment from the researchers, what I hear them telling me is that they need new algorithms to really begin to do new modeling where you're building these risk scenarios in the infrastructure planning for the future.
Yeah. What is connected to what Keoki has raised in terms of new models for infrastructure, in some way, let's say, distributed, connected, interconnected, networked infrastructures, that the way we model those things, not just in terms of engineering, operating, but also in financial terms, is a key discussion. We had yesterday a panel that addressed this issue of financing and how to connect the financing and risk mitigation, risk pooling in infrastructure projects, and addressing new aspects like sustainability and the things of climate that you have just raised, Candace. So I think that's a great perspective, but also a great lead to some of the discussions that we have here today. I know Jack was around and Hugh Weathers. Another thing related to the digital age, but also financial. That is not just the infrastructure projects themselves, but the opportunities to disrupt infrastructures and to disrupt finance and to provide access to the bottom of the pyramid through new digital infrastructures. But all those things will require a lot of developments, and Professor Zachary mentioned in his 4 points that, and how to prepare citizens, how to prepare businesses. So I want to go to both Professor Zachary and you, Keoki, on, let's say, the implications for manufacturing and what is needed. Maybe consider you are really a company, an organization that is in the front of that, adopting digital solutions from visualization to high-performance computing, and that has lots of implications, economy-wide, and implications that at some moment we have to go to SMEs at some point. So if you could give your perspective on that, and then we would go for Professor Zachary's comments.
That's a good question, Roberto. And I talked about fundamentally reshaping how Lockheed Martin develops and produces products. And it's disruptive, but disruptive in a very exciting way. And so we are almost at the forefront here at Lockheed Martin of really taking this end-to-end digital integration of all of our systems. And so starting from basic things around requirements and architecture, informed again by modeling and simulation, through detailed design, but then getting into the actual production and manufacturing, whether it's additive manufacturing, robotic manufacturing, and ultimately into integration, into test, into certification, delivery, and then post-delivery sustainment and logistics. And so now this gives us the opportunity to remove mistakes, to do quality control almost as a matter of design rather than a matter of inspection, to improve productivity throughout. And I'll give just a couple of examples. We have a facility called the CHILL, our collaborative human interface laboratory, and it's basically a 3D immersive environment. And we can do a couple of things. One is we can build anything, a satellite, an aircraft, virtually before doing it actually in the real world. And we found that that essentially eliminates mistakes when you do it for the first time in reality. And secondly, we can do things like lay out entire factories, do the flow, do Monte Carlo simulations, and prove how this will work. Again, drive that efficiency in, taking out something like 2/3 of many of the moves, the costs, the lifts, all the risky attributes. So we're tremendously excited about that. And again, it goes from the very beginning to the very end of the life cycle of these products. Now, it's interesting because you talk about new models. And so now this is essentially a new model. And we have an existing workforce. Of course, we continue to bring in new talent. But a lot of times we used to hear from engineers saying, gee, we can't get the manufacturing folks to build the things we want. It's completely turned around today. Now we've got the manufacturing folks saying, hey, I can print you whatever, but they're saying, hey, the engineers aren't designing us the things that we need to to make best use of these new manufacturing capabilities. So to me, that's in a way a very exciting kind of a turnaround, but it emphasizes the challenge in terms of rebooting a workforce in the midst of all of our programs and so on that are going on at any given time.
You raised this point of, we now have the capabilities to do things because of digitalization that were not capable in the past. Yeah, that in some way reshapes the connection between engineering and manufacturing. Yeah, but it creates opportunities, and that makes me recall a conversation that we had the other day on sustainability, on new models, and on infrastructure with a young entrepreneur that's creating a company to 3D print houses. And today, she says that she will be able, in 2 months, to 3D print a house with 60 square meters by $20,000. And she expects that to get to $4,000 in a few years. So there are things that we're not able to do in the past, and that this whole transformation. And can they mention some of the things that are happening, not just in Africa, but in India and around the globe in that space? But for those things, we'll need to train entrepreneurs. Professor Zachary mentioned that digital entrepreneurship, and we'll need to train people. So if you could maybe explore that, Professor Zachary, how are you, with your current role, working to create the layer of infrastructure or soft infrastructures that are needed today in terms of addressing your 4 points?
Well, it's a very challenging one, developing entrepreneurs. In the first place, if you look at countries, developing countries, in terms of investment in R&D, it's very low. In fact, in the developed economies, you would have investment from 2.5% of its GDP to 3.5%. Whereas in many developing countries, if you can achieve 1% of your GDP on R&D, that's already worthwhile. That's one point to remember. Secondly, if you look around, the SMEs, at least in developing countries again, they don't do any R&D. So they don't have that knowledge base. Third, we are relying on academics, researchers in the universities. But in the main, in the universities, professors are interested in publishing in peer-reviewed journals, getting all those citations and getting their promotion. And when you requested them to link that research output to real products, it's very challenging. There's no connection. And I'm talking from experience. We have invested a lot. In a sense, you cannot blame the academics. You cannot blame the academics. They have their own set. They're not really innovators in the sense trying to produce products for the market. You would agree with me. So what do? We have tried several, and one of that is what we call this public-private research network, where we try to link the needs of the industry, the needs of the SMEs with the academics in the universities. It has been a good start, but we are not there yet. The other point I think Malaysia is trying to experiment is to link up this public-private partnership on a bigger scale. For instance, the government recently had a collaborative program in aerospace involving two giants out there, namely Airbus and Rolls-Royce, in collaboration with the consortium of public universities, some SMEs. Of course, we started in a small way, like for the Malaysian SMEs producing some small parts of the aeroplane, for instance, A380, it built the confidence. And this is where we start. And the other point, Mr. Chair, in a country like Malaysia, one of the 17 mega diverse countries in the world, and today we're looking at challenges for renewable technologies. So what do? One of the research programs that we have initiated, it's quite a long shot, is trying to find a replacement for current jet fuel by researching on microalgae as a source of fuel. And at least at the lab level, it has shown promise. But I think that is the kind of collaboration or partnership that we need to foster and encourage across the board, really.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kande, please.
Side of the infrastructure, I think Deborah will remember that a few years ago, one of your U.S. Competitiveness Council meetings, it was focused entirely on energy. And it was interesting to see in the United States, they were mapping out what skills they do not have in order to enhance their competitiveness along a number of energy technologies. And of course, MIT, Harvard, my own former school, University of Illinois, were all there. But it was amazing for me because you assume that, okay, all of that is covered by the US. But the real frankness of the US Competitiveness Council saying, look, in this technology, we're number 5, we're not number 1. But here are the skills we will need to go back to number 2 or number 1. But just doing that mapping, and I believe this is where your federation would become useful with these kinds of toolkits, an honest analysis of the human capital required to go the next level, or the kind of knowledge transfers that can take place. But I remember that conference in Washington entirely devoted to looking at the U.S. energy landscape over the next 20 years.
Energy is everything.
Energy is everything was the slogan, yes.
Thank you so much for your comment, because you just anticipated my last question for you all in terms of, and this is not the moment. I want to open the floor for questions. But my last question will be, in your final comments, which topics could the GFCC in some way address to help us all in some way to make progress in that agenda? As we have a few minutes, I want to open the floor for questions to see if someone has any topic that wanted to raise for this conversation. So please, do we have mic runners here?
Excellent panel, actually. A lot of good things to think about. There are one observation I have that in the 21st century, everybody's focusing on digital technologies. But I have traveled across cities from Tokyo to Beijing to Delhi to Chicago. One thing that I find that digits are not limited. It is the roads, those are limited. And there are more cars and more people and far less street. In some developed countries, the streets and bridges are to the point of serious renovation. In the countries like Beijing and other parts, in the urban areas there could be, but they're so congested that it takes sometimes 2 hours just to go a few blocks. And I have not heard any discussion pertaining to human transport. I mean, you can transport all by Facebook, but not by human transport. And that is one question I would love to hear your thoughts about that. And the last point that I believe to the ideas, I have found this across the world that universities hire some of the best professors, some of the best intelligent minds of the world, give them some of the most complex problems to solve, but they are so vulnerable to the university systems that they get evaluated by papers, citations, students, and they produce working class, but they don't produce innovators. It is a very sad story to watch across all world, actually.
So, anyone who want to comment on that?
I'll maybe make a couple of comments. First on your, and maybe I'll start just with your last point. I'm seeing a real revolution, I think, in some of the same places, whether it's India or Korea, a transformation in the way we think about the products of the universities. And so it's not just necessarily papers or citations, but it's inventions, it's companies, and it's more and more those students who are going out into the world and creating new enterprises. And so that brings me to mind, look at Lockheed Martin, where we're 110,000 people, but approximately 70,000 engineers and scientists. And so now, more and more, there's this need for this global talent pool. Within the United States, we try to increase access for women and minorities, and we've had some success there, but now we're looking everywhere. And ultimately, I think in the United States, our success will be driven by our ability to attract and retain that global and very mobile talent pool. And so I think that's an area where the United States needs to focus more and more.
We're told by the scientists once every 100 years. The impact to infrastructure is about 1 billion US. 1 billion US. And for a small country, that's quite debilitating. So the Prime Minister called me up. Is there a science and technology response to the floods? So I convened a group. I convened a group of academics, experts from the research institute in the various government agencies, NGOs, and the private sector. What I was amazed, Deborah, is this lack of communication, these silos among the different agencies. They're not talking to one another. So to conclude, this is where big data, access to data, can play a key role. Thank you.
You are more than welcome. As we're we really run out of time, I want to then go to each one of you for a final comment and building up on some of the ideas that we had in the panel today in terms of opportunities, but also what could an organization like the GFCC do to help all of us in transforming those opportunities into realities in terms of digital inclusion and taking advantage of those opportunities. Fahad.
Just a quick one. I would really recommend, which I haven't seen, I've been in the telecom business or the digital business for more than 15 years. I haven't seen a good plan here in the kingdom that put us on the digitization path. So we have to have a vision, a good plan that have a couple of indices to be monitored and benchmark against global indices that are there, which are really must to have in order to be in the right path to have the right infrastructure for our digital-based economy.
My comment will be to answer part of the question that the questioner asked. As we talk digitalization, I guess part of the spirit of his question is we still have part of humanity that does not have basic services. 1.3 billion people without electricity, 2.7 billion using firewood, charcoal for their primary energy needs. And you can add to that list the number without water. And so for a prosperous and safe world, we need to share ideas to have an inclusive and prosperity for all. I also would like to say, look, we can leapfrog. In 2000, we had between 2 to 4 million mobile connections in Africa. By 2014, we had 720 million mobile connections. So even these poor countries are major markets, and digitalization and connectivity and innovation is now making them viable potential markets. As I just gave, it's the same projections we have for television needs in Africa as the population grows and incomes rise.
Thank you. Keoki.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just take a step back, and we've talked a lot today about what I'd call the hard infrastructure and maybe the soft infrastructure. And I think something that's really important to Lockheed Martin, to all of our customers around the world, to anybody who's entrusted, with the public trust in the work that they do, is the importance of the infrastructure around values and principles, and in particular transparency, ethics and integrity in all that we do. And so this is something that I think underlies and is behind the creation of the basic infrastructures that we'll need for the 21st century, and something that I think all of us share.
Professor Zachary.
I think I've said enough, but I just want to say that the Global Federation of Competitiveness Council has really an opportunity and a role to play a leading role in these problems. I've seen the membership is still limited, but the potential is tremendous, and I'm sure the world will listen to you. Thank you.
And we'll be happy to count with your advice and support in making that happen. Just to finish a few topics that I believe that summarize in some way our conversation. I think there are three challenges: to provide access, to prepare citizens, and to prepare businesses in some way for that new reality. For sure, there are new possibilities that are opened up for that. I think that Keoki mentioned this whole idea that we can make things today that we're not able to make in the past. And at the same time, there are opportunities for countries and regions to leapfrog, as Kande has highlighted. Those things will require new models, not just for infrastructures themselves and for us to take the best of the assets in which we have invested, but especially new models, new soft models for funding, for training, for really developing the skills that are needed for those things to happen. Something that was really interesting to me personally is this nexus between energy and digital that Kande has developed. But going beyond that climate, in terms that it really impacts infrastructures, and more, Professor Zachary comment on what happened in Malaysia, but we're more and more facing extreme climate events, and we all, in terms of resilience and infrastructures, will need to prepare, and they have a really strong impact in digital infrastructures. But also, I was mentioned here today in terms of the softed financial models that will need to mitigate risk, to pull risk in that kind of project. Yeah. And in terms of financial, I think there's something else related to soft infrastructures that connects not just to the implementation of projects, but as I said, as Jack will explore and others, in terms of creating opportunities for the bottom of the pyramid through digitalization. Yeah. And in the end, two things: planning, a key issue, and I remember the conversation that I had with Chad Holiday in preparation of this whole conference. And Chad said, there's one word: planning. The thing that you need to think in terms of moving forward. And in the end, it will be about people, as all of you have mentioned. I hope you have enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.